Today, we're going to talk about the RMS Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. This is a massive ship that was built back in 1934, and it was one of the most luxurious ships to ever sail the seas. There were actually 3 ships in this series, but this one is by far the most famous. It went through quite a few changes over the years, and today it serves as a hotel and a popular tourist destination. But little did I know when I first visited this place. There is some pretty dark history here and there. There's even some ghost stories associated with this place too. So today we're going to explore the dark history of the RMS Queen Mary in Long Beach, California, coming up. Now before we get into the more sinister side of the ship, let's learn a bit about the ship itself. The Queen Mary was actually the second ship in a series of ocean liners that were all named after British monarchs. The first ship was the HMS May, which sank on its maiden voyage, and the third ship would be the HMS Elizabeth, which was sunk during World War II. The construction of the ship began in 1930 and it was completed 4 years later. It was built at the John Brown and Company shipyard in Clydebank, Scotland, and this was also the same shipyard where the HMS Titanic was built. The ship was launched on July 26, 1934, and it was named by the wife of the Duke of York, who was the future Queen Elizabeth II. The ship set sail for the first time on May 27, 1936, and it was originally scheduled to make a stop in Southampton, England. But because of a dock workers' strike, the ship had to turn around and head back to the shipyard for repairs. Ironically, the workers who refused to fix the ship were members of the British Transport and General Workers' Union, which was led by a man named As Kennedy. The next day, the ship set sail again, but this time it headed straight to New York City, where it made its official maiden voyage. The Queen Mary was one of the most luxurious ships to ever sail the Atlantic Ocean. It had 2 swimming pools, a ballroom, a theater, a gym, a library, a casino, shops, restaurants, a golf course, and even a hospital. There were 3 classes of passengers on the ship: first, second, and third class. First-class passengers had access to all the ship's amenities, while second and third-class passengers were segregated from the rest of the ship and had their own separate facilities. Despite its opulence, the Queen Mary was not a profitable ship. It lost money in its first year of operation, and it continued to do so throughout the 1930s. This was due in part to the Great Depression, which made it difficult for people to afford transatlantic trips. The ship was also criticized for being too large and too expensive to operate. In 1938, the ship was refitted to try to make it more appealing to passengers. The first-class facilities were greatly reduced, and many of them were converted into cabins. This made the ship more of a cruise liner than a transatlantic liner, but it didn't really help the ship's financial problems. When World War II broke out in 1939, the Queen Mary was one of the first ships to be requisitioned by the British government. It was used as a troop transport, and it made several trips across the Atlantic, carrying soldiers to and from Europe. The ship was also used as a transport for prisoners of war and refugees. The ship was bombed several times during the war, but it was always able to make it to port. The ship was also damaged by a friendly fire incident in 1942, when an American warship opened fire on the ship, thinking it was an enemy submarine. This caused significant damage to the ship, but there were no casualties. After the war ended, the Queen Mary was returned to civilian service. It continued to operate as a cruise liner until 1967. In 1968, the ship was sold to the Federal Merchant Marine, and it was used as a military barracks. In 1973, the ship was designated as a National Historic Landmark. In 1975, the ship was sold again, this time to a group of investors who planned to turn it into a hotel and a museum. The ship was towed to Long Beach, California, and it was officially opened as a hotel on April 11, 1976. Today, the ship is still open as a hotel and a popular tourist destination. It has been featured in several movies and TV shows, and it is one of the most photographed buildings in Long Beach. Now that you know a bit about the ship, let's get into some of the haunted stories associated with it. The most famous ghost story associated with the Queen Mary is that of a young girl who drowned in one of the ship's swimming pools. Her name was Helen Viola, and she was the daughter of the ship's doctor. On April 1936, Helen and her brother were playing near the ship's pool when she slipped and fell into the water. She was only 7 years old and she couldn't swim. Her brother tried to help her, but he was unable to reach her. The pool was drained and her body was never recovered. Some people believe that Helen's ghost still haunts the ship, especially around the pool area. People have reported seeing a little girl in a Victorian nightgown walking the decks at night. They've also heard the sound of children's laughter and footsteps in the corridors. Another famous ghost story involves a sailor who died in the engine room. His name was John Pedder, and he worked on the ship's engines. On March 27, 1937, he was killed when he was caught in a propeller. His body was never recovered, and some people believe his ghost still haunts the ship. People have reported hearing the sound of heavy footsteps in the engine room, and they've also seen the shadow of a man working on the engines. There's also a story of a sailor who died in the boiler room. His name was Thomas O'Brien, and he was killed when he was hit by a piece of flying metal. His body was never recovered, and some people believe his ghost still haunts the ship. People have reported seeing the apparition of a man in the boiler room, and they've also heard the sound of his screams. Another story involves a stewardess who died in a fire. Her name was Violet Jessup, and she was working on the ship when it caught fire. On January 1937, the ship caught fire and 20 people died. Violet was able to escape, but she suffered severe burns, and she died a few days later. Some people believe that Violet's ghost still haunts the ship, especially in the area where she died. People have reported smelling the scent of burning hair, and they've also seen the shadow of a woman running through the corridors. Another story involves a passenger who died in a collision. Her name was Elizabeth Kincaid, and she was a first-class passenger. On September 1939, the ship collided with another ship and Elizabeth was killed. Her body was never recovered, and some people believe that Elizabeth's ghost still haunts the ship. People have reported seeing the apparition of a woman in the dining room, and they've also heard the sound of glasses breaking. Finally, there's a story of a crew member who died in an explosion. His name was Frederick Fleet, and he was working in the ship's kitchen. On April 1938, an explosion in the kitchen killed 5 people. Frederick was one of the victims, and his body was never recovered. Some people believe that Frederick's ghost still haunts the ship, especially in the kitchen. People have reported hearing the sound of pots and pans banging, and they've also seen the shadow of a man working in the kitchen. There are other ghost stories associated with the ship, but these are the most famous ones. Some people believe that the ghosts are the spirits of people who died on the ship or in the shipyard where it was built. Others believe that the ghosts are the spirits of people who sailed on the ship during its heyday in the 1930s. Whatever the case may be, the Queen Mary is one of the most haunted places in Long Beach. Alright, everyone, that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of our awesome videos. Alright, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.